Good afternoon, everyone. This hearing will come to order. Good afternoon, and thank you for your presence here today. We're going to consider the nominees for the VA Inspector General and the Assistant Secretary for Congressional and Legislative Affairs. We'll do so respectively, two different panels. These are two really important and I think difficult positions, and I'm pleased to have two candidates that are committed for our consideration to pursue and perform these duties of these positions. I've spoken many times here in this hearing and elsewhere about the importance of having a Senate-confirmed Inspector General. The IG's work is essential to identifying areas where the VA is falling short, and this committee's job would be much harder without the help of an Inspector General. This is before us today as a lawyer, a military spouse, a leader who has been appointed to high-level positions within the VA by both President Biden and President Trump, and I look forward to hearing this afternoon how Cheryl Mason, the nominee for VA Inspector General, would continue the IG's independent oversight if she's confirmed. Similarly, I look forward to hearing how Don Bergen, the nominee to be Assistant Secretary of Congressional and Legislative Affairs, would improve transparency, timeliness, and substance of the VA's communications with this committee and Congress as a whole if he is confirmed. Regardless of which party is in the White House or which party has control of Congress, the Department of Veterans Affairs has never been as open and as forthcoming as they should be. I am hopeful that Don, a veteran, lawyer, and former congressional liaison for the Marine Corps, and a former Senate staffer will be able to detail his plans for helping the VA quickly improve on that front in his testimony today. I appreciate both nominees and their family members for being here today and for their interest in taking on these roles. In the absence of Senator Blumenthal, Senator Murray, anything you want to say?
I will just ask to put his statement in the record and welcome the committee, Ms. Mason, to the committee.
Without objection. Senator Tillerson and Senator Cornyn had planned on being here today to introduce Mrs. Mason and Mr. Bergen. Due to their scheduling circumstances, are unable to join us, and I ask unanimous consent that their statements be submitted for the record without objection. Mrs. Mason, before being recognized for your opening statement, please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give before the United States Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. I do. Thank you. Thank you very much. Cheryl Mason, you are now recognized for your statement.
Thank you, Senator. Chairman Moran, distinguished members of this committee, I'm honored to sit before you today as the President's nominee to be Inspector General of the Department of Veterans Affairs. I am joined today by my husband of 39 years, Brett Mason, Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Air Force retired, our youngest son, Trevor, and my brother's widow and his adult children. Our oldest son, Brian, sends his regrets as he was unable to attend. Since 1865, when President Lincoln proclaimed our nation's duty was to care for those who had borne the battle, their widows and orphans, our country has made care for our veterans a tenet. This is the core mission of VA. If confirmed, I pledge to uphold my lifelong commitment to the Constitution and to our veterans, their families, survivors, and caregivers. My commitment to those who serve this country is deep and personal. As an Air Force veteran's spouse, daughter of a Navy veteran, sister of an Army Guardsman, and proud American, I am one of those survivors and a dependent such as those VA serves. My father served in the U.S. Navy during World War II, but he lost his battle with mental health and died by suicide when I was 4 years old. My family lived in Appalachia, and we didn't know about the benefits and care he could have received from VA. And as I sit here today, decades later, there are still veterans in this country who do not know about the veteran services they can receive, while others wait much too long for their benefits and care. This is not acceptable. I also lost my only brother, that Army National Guardsman, to suicide when he was 34 years old. my brother's widow and children, received no benefits following his death, and they had to fight to get him recognized as a veteran. This is not acceptable. It was my mother, a Rosie the Riveter, during World War II, and a public servant, government teacher for more than 30 years, who steered our family through these challenging times. She instilled in me the value of public service, the importance of the Constitution and the U.S. government, and the impact of making a difference to others and to our nation. My experiences as a military spouse amplified my understanding of the tremendous sacrifice made by the men and women who commit themselves to the defense of this nation. When I became a lawyer, I made it my lifelong commitment to serve veterans and military families. With more than 30 years as a government employee, to include 28 at Department of Veterans Affairs, I have countless hours of service to veterans and their families as a veterans law judge and as a VA attorney. It was an honor to be nominated by President Trump in 2017 and advanced by this committee under the leadership of Senators Isaacson and Tester, and confirmed by the Senate to serve as the first woman and military spouse chairman of the Board of Veterans Appeals. And as chairman, I worked with members of Congress and senators and staff of this committee, with its long history of bipartisan accomplishments and commitment on behalf of Americans' veterans, to address mental health and suicide, increase accountability, and improve access to benefits and care and services with the Appeals Modernization Act, the Mission Act, the Blue Water Navy Act, and the VA Telehearing Modernization Act. I was humbled by Senator Tester's tribute to me in the January 23 congressional record regarding my advocacy and commitment to veterans through my many years of service in the government. It's an honor to be nominated by President Trump and considered by this committee to be the VA Inspector General. I remain dedicated to ensuring veterans receive VA benefits, care, and services they earned, and I strongly believe that VA has to be held accountable to deliver such. Our veterans and their families are counting on it. My leadership and lifelong experience demonstrate my impartiality, my expertise, my skills and judgment to be a highly effective Inspector General. My professional legal career provided me with value experience in investigations, audits, and inspections, focusing on the facts and the evidence and applying the law. The VA Inspector General plays a crucial and independent role in ensuring the VA meets its mission by promoting efficiency and eliminating fraud, waste, and abuse. Recent reports from this body, OIG, GAO, and others highlight the need for improvements of VA services to veterans. If confirmed, I will use the authority provided by law to implement strong oversight and strengthen programs and policy and culture at VA. As chairman and veterans law judge, I acted independently, issuing decisions to be followed by VA, guarding the impartiality and independence of the board, and I will do the same if confirmed as IG. This is indeed a great responsibility, and I can assure you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Blumenthal, and members of this committee, that if confirmed, I will uphold that trust on behalf of all men and women who serve, all those who have served, and the American public. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Ms. Mason, thank you very much. Senator Blumenthal, the ranking member is recognized.
Thank you. Thank you to Senator Murray for putting my opening statement in the record. I will just add two quick points. First of all, the Office of Inspector General is one that has to be completely nonpartisan and independent. We have never, I am told, confirmed someone for that position who was a political appointee already serving in any department. You would be unique in that regard, which gives me tremendous pause. And it has to be seen in the context of the firing of most of our inspectors general by the President of the United States, illegally, done in a way that seems really regrettable. So what we need now, more than any time in our history, is a person in that position who is non-political completely nonpartisan and independent. The alternative is for the credibility of the office to be diminished. And so I think you have the burden of proof at this point before this committee to show that you will in fact pursue the kind of waste, fraud, and abuse, to use the classic phraseology that has come to be so commonly used that it has lost a lot of its meaning, and in reality has been ignored by this administration. So that is as much as I think I need to say right now. My full statement's in the record. And thank you for your willingness to serve, to you and Mr. Bergen. We look forward to your testimony further.
Senator Blumenthal, thank you. Mrs. Mason, along the lines, you indicated during your opening statement about some of the things that Senator Blumenthal is talking about. But I share, my number one question on my list is to ask you how your experience as a senior advisor to Secretary Collins will inform your work and priorities as the VA Inspector General, and how would you maintain objectivity and independence and avoid even the appearance of impropriety, given that you have been serving as a senior political leader at the department when you're now undertaking a new task with different responsibilities?
Well, thank you, Senator Moran, and I appreciate the question, and Senator Blumenthal, I acknowledge your remarks. So let me start with facts and evidence. As a lawyer and as a previous investigator, facts are extremely important. So let's look at the facts of who Cheryl Mason is and my track record. I noted that I had worked at the department for 28 years as part of my 30 years of service. Those 28 years were spent at the Board of Veterans Appeals, an independent, impartial organization that holds the department accountable to follow the law and implement veterans benefits and services under the decisions made. I spent 20 years of my time, including my time as chairman, as a judge at the board. So when the president asked me to return as senior advisor, the role is not as many assume the senior advisor role may be, at least not my role as senior advisor. My role was to use that knowledge I had of VA and that experience I had as an impartial, independent fact finder and advisor to the secretary on things I understood and knew about VA as a subject matter expert in veterans law and in leadership. So the senior advisor role was to gather information, much like a fact finder does, and convey that information to the secretary and to other senior leaders. So it's it correlates well to Inspector General. The difference is Inspector General has teeth, and that is very much what is needed. In the department, I saw it from my 28 years in the department as an attorney and judge and chairman. I had to protect the independence of the board on a number of occasions against interference. And, those were things that I would do again as Inspector General, if confirmed.
Mrs. Mason, under the Inspector General Act, the IG serves under the VA Secretary, but has a dual and independent reporting relationship with the United States Congress. Explain how, if confirmed, would you balance those dual responsibilities owed to separate branches of the government whose interests may at times conflict?
Well, thank you for that question, Chairman Moran. And, as the daughter of a government teacher who I cut my teeth on the Watergate hearings, I well understand the differences and the responsibilities of all three branches of government, the executive branch and the judicial branch and the legislative branch. And indeed, as you note, Inspector General is unique as much as I am in serving both reporting to the secretary and reporting to this committee. And I acknowledge the oversight of this committee, just as I did as chairman. It's extremely important that you have that relationship with the IG so that you can bring those issues. And you can also report those same issues to the secretary to ensure there's awareness of issues and concerns. So the secretary needs to know what's going on in his world, and you need to know what's going on at VA.
Ms. Mason, why do you think the VA has yet to implement so many recommendations made by the Inspector General? And if confirmed, how would you anticipate working with the VA to close out as many of those recommendations as possible and make certain that future recommendations by the IG are acted on in a much more timely manner?
Thank you for the question, Chairman. If confirmed, that is one of the areas that does concern me. There are over 500 pending, open, unimplemented recommendations from the IG, some going back as long as 7 years. I believe there needs to be an inventory and accountability on those, follow-up with all of those recommendations, even the ones that the department has taken. It's the responsibility of the IG to follow up and monitor to ensure that those are properly being followed. And that's something that I would be setting up as IG, working with the staff as I assess how they work and how they do their work, because I think following up with those important recommendations to ensure that we're providing the best services, care, and benefits to veterans is extremely important.
Thank you for your answers to my questions, Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks. Let me ask you, if confirmed, will you launch an investigation into Secretary Collins's mass termination of employees, which have been found illegal by the courts?
Senator Blumenthal, thank you for that question. If confirmed, the responsibility of the IG is to look at all concerns and issues that it brings up itself, or as the committee brings up, or others. And so,
I'm asking you about the terminations in particular. Will you launch an investigation into
if
those
there are
terminations?
terminations that impact the benefits and care and service to veterans that are improper, IG will look into them,
They've
yes.
been found to be illegal. Won't you investigate?
Well, I would investigate but some of those issues are currently in litigation with the courts, and so it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on them at this time.
Will you investigate the Secretary's proposed reorganization?
Thank you for the question, Senator Blumenthal. I can't investigate anything until the action occurs. So OIG would definitely look at that with the team and assess whether there needs to be an investigation into that.
Well, you can investigate actions that are taken preliminarily to a final plan or action. Let me ask you, have you had any role in either the firings of VA employees to date?
No, I have not, Senator.
And what about the plans to fire as many as 83,000 more?
Thank you for the question. I have not had a role in any of those activities. Those activities were handled by the HRA team and General Counsel.
Have you participated in the realignment of senior executive service staff across the board, VBA, and Office of General Counsel?
Thank you for the question, Senator. The situation there was that the acting secretary decided to direct some changes across the administrations and staff offices under the president's executive order to restore accountability to the career SESs and follow the 1979 SES Act. And he felt that it was important to reassign some of these people to ensure collaboration.
I don't understand. Have you played a role in that realignment?
My role was to convey the reassignments to the staff offices that were in my portfolio.
So you have participated in those actions?
I did not participate. I conveyed the acting secretary's direction to reassign those people.
Okay, we can argue about words here, but I think you get my point, which is you're unwilling to review mass firings, which have been found to be illegal. You are unwilling to be forthright in your responses to these questions. You served the Secretary of the VA, correct?
I served as a senior advisor to the Secretary of VA for a period of time, but again, as I explained, my role was...
And to his team?
I'm sorry, to his team?
You've served as an advisor to him, and you've worked with his team, correct?
I served as advisor to the Secretary, and I advised those within my portfolio as to the directions the Secretary directed.
And you've considered yourself to be a loyal aide, correct?
I consider myself to be an impartial, independent aide to the department because that's my role.
You've considered yourself to be a loyal aide, correct?
I am loyal to the veterans. That's who I serve. That's who I'm loyal to.
You work for him.
I work for the President and the Secretary, but I also, if confirmed as IG, will work for this committee.
have you been involved in the request of VA employees to sign non-disclosure agreements?
Senator, I have not.
You have had no involvement.
I have had no involvement in that activity.
What is your involvement in the reorganization and the RIFs that Secretary Collins has planned?
Senator Blumenthal, I have had no involvement in that activity.
What have you done?
Well, again, my role as senior advisor is to gather information. When you look at how...
Like you haven't been earning your pay.
Well, I have, because the department is quite siloed, as you know, and VBA is very siloed.
But
in
what
its
have you done?
actions. So I've been investigating and looking at VBA and providing advice to the VBA leadership, as well as other careerists at the board and at National Cemetery Administration. So I've been earning my pay, 12-hour days, almost every day.
You have been earning your pay as a loyal advisor, a member of the Collins team, an employee at his behest, a political appointee, not as a career civil servant. You are a political appointee as Inspector General, and that is why I will object to your nomination. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Tuberville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Mason, thank you for being here. The Office of Inspector General recently put out a report highlighting reports within the fiduciary program, such as failures with training protocol. Can you commit to working with me and my staff to developing solutions to make the program work better for our most vulnerable veterans?
Thank you, Senator Tuberville, and absolutely I can commit to do that. I think that's extremely important.
Thank you. The Inspector General has put out several reports highlighting failures with suicide crisis line. How would you work with Secretary Collins to ensure these recommendations are implemented to support veterans and reduce suicide?
Thank you for the question, Senator Tuberville. As we discussed in your office, I'm very suicide is very personal to me. I've had 2 suicides in my family. Both were veterans. And so I take that very seriously. And I've looked at the IG reports, and I've looked at the other things the department is doing. And there are several activities going on now. Currently, as a senior advisor of EEO, I'm looking at some of the suicide actions that are being taken to do prevention and awareness in our partnerships, and I would continue to advise to do that. If confirmed as IG, I would continue to look at those actions to include the grants on mental health and suicide that the department has, make sure there's appropriate oversight into that, as well as what the crisis line is doing, ensure that they are properly staffed and have the right support and resources they need to answer those calls, because those calls do save lives.
Thank you. When confirmed, what will be your first thing that you want to do as the new IG?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. I think, the first thing I want to do is really get a good assessment of the office. I want to make sure the accountability is extremely important, and the integrity of that office is extremely important. And I have no reason to think that they don't operate that way now. But IG has to operate that way, as independent and impartial. And so I want to make sure that they, one, are operating that way in everything they do, but they also have the adequate resources. And then find out what their current investigations are, see where they are in those investigations. But right behind that is follow up on those open, unimplemented recommendations and figure out how we bring those to close with the department and with this committee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I yield my time.
Senator Murray.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Mason, you did say on your questionnaire that you continued to be a senior advisor to Secretary Collins after you were nominated to become the Inspector General monitoring his agency. While you were senior advisor to Secretary Collins, what discussions were you involved in related to abruptly canceling contracts or ending DEI efforts or eliminating outreach to LGBTQ?
Thank you for the question, Senator Murray. And to be clear, yes, at the time I answered the questionnaire, I was senior advisor to the Secretary. That role ended very quickly. After I submitted that questionnaire, I'm now senior advisor to VEO and do not sit in the Secretary's suite.
Well,
So as for your question as to those roles, the only roles I had with contracts were ensuring that the organizations that were in my portfolio knew that they needed to justify the contracts and ensured that they responded timely. I did not review contracts. I was not involved in those. As far as in the DEI situation, that was an executive order, and shortly after the senior advisors came in, they were followed by more senior advisors, and that was not something that was on my plate. That belonged to general counsel and the senior advisor who was charged with EEOs.
I'd ask Senator Blumenthal's question again. What substantive work were you doing if you weren't involved in any of that?
Well, again, my role as senior advisor was to look into actions that were going on in the administrations.
But a lot of the actions that were going on in the administration that we know about were about ending DEI, about firing employees, about canceling contracts. So that was most of the activity that was going on there. So
that was not in my portfolio. There were separate senior advisors assigned to that. My portfolio was looking at the way those organizations operated and how they served veterans, particularly VBA, because it's such a large organization. There were challenges with the digital GI Bill, challenge with disability compensation backlogs and inventory with both the board and VBA, challenges with loan guarantees. There were a variety of challenges within VBA that I was
Okay, well, let me
looking at.
ask you differently. What was your engagement with DOGE in the White House outside of the Presidential Personnel Office?
I have no engagement with DOGE in the White House.
Zero. No contact? No, you know.
The only contact I had was a swearing in. I attended a swearing in for a person who has since, has left the department in DOGE. That person, I attended the VA swearing in. That was it.
Well, as you know, Congress has a responsibility to conduct oversight over the Office of Inspector General to make sure that they are properly conducting their role. So it's really crucial, as you well know, that the OIG is transparent. If you are confirmed, will you provide us with a list of every ongoing OIG investigation within 30 days?
Yes, Senator, I will do so.
Okay. The budget for VA proposed the elimination of, quote, unnecessary outreach activities. From a congressional perspective, it is really critical to make sure that any canceled outreach doesn't impact veterans' ability to receive care that's necessary to provide. If confirmed, will you hold the department responsible for conducting all outreach that is in statute or policy, even if the political leadership, meaning your former boss, Secretary Collins, doesn't want to reach out to those groups?
So, Senator Murray, I will look into all those situations, and I will see where they are statutory required, and they will be held accountable under my watch as OIG if confirmed.
Okay, well, let me just ask this. Congress was very clear in 1978 when it passed the law governing inspectors general. The law states, and I want to quote it, each inspector general shall be appointed without regard to political affiliation and solely on the basis of integrity. Do you believe that an inspector general should be entirely independent from the administration in which they serve?
Thank you for that question, Senator Murray. I do.
Well, you were a political appointee for President Trump in his first term. And as we said on your questionnaire, you said you continued to be an advisor to Secretary Collins after you were nominated for this. Do you believe that this demonstrates the kind of nonpartisanship it takes to successfully execute this job?
Well, Senator Murray, I would refer to my years of experience in the department. I served 12 secretaries, 6, now 7 administrations. I am unique in that I was a careerist who became a political appointee during the Trump administration, but I served into the Biden administration, and President Biden appointed me to a position to ensure that the department was implementing the executive orders from President Obama, President Trump, and President Biden on hiring veterans and military spouses. So yes, I do believe I have that as a lawyer and as a judge and as chairman, which was an independent, impartial position.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Senator Hassan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon. Congratulations to you and your family on your nomination. And just on a personal note, I am really sorry for the toll that suicide has taken on your family.
Thank you.
And I'm grateful that you have been open about that. I think that openness helps a lot of people. I want to start by asking you a straightforward question that I ask all nominees. If directed by the President to take action that would break the law, would you follow the law or follow the President's directive?
Senator Hassan, I appreciate that question, and I will follow the law as a lawyer.
Thank you. Earlier this year, President Trump illegally fired the VA's Inspector General along with several other Inspectors General. Do you support the firing of Inspectors General without the President first providing the required statutory notice to Congress?
Well, thank you for that question. It would really be inappropriate for me to comment on that, as that issue is currently being litigated in the courts.
I will just comment that as a lawyer, as somebody who has prided herself in this testimony to us as on understanding and investigating facts and applying the law, I think you could venture to say that the President's firing of the Inspector General at the VA and across government violated the clear language of the statute. And I'm disappointed that you're unwilling to say that. Let me move on to another question, which really follows up on issues that both Senator Moran and Blumenthal have raised. You've served as a senior advisor to Secretary Collins since January, and you've worked at the VA for decades. The Inspector General is required to be, as you pointed out, nonpartisan and independent from agency leadership. However, your prior work advising Secretary Collins calls into question your ability to be nonpartisan and independent. If you become the IG, you would need to recuse yourself from many investigations in order to preserve the independence of the office. Will you recuse yourself from any investigations relating to matters you worked on while previously employed by the VA?
Thank you, Senator Hassan. And yes, as an attorney, I would, as my duty and as a member of the bar, in certain situations, I would absolutely have to recuse myself. I did so as chairman. I did so as a veterans law judge in that world, and I would do so as appropriate as IG.
Thank you. Will you commit to continuing any open investigations that were initiated by the last Inspector General?
Yes, Senator, I will.
Thank you. The VA is reportedly planning to fire roughly 80,000 employees, and recent reporting suggests that the VA is requiring all employees who are working on these staffing cuts to sign non-disclosure agreements. However, one key role of the Office of the Inspector General is to independently receive reports of wrongdoing within the VA from employees, and the Inspector General has this obligation regardless of whether the employee has signed an NDA. Will you commit that your office will independently and thoroughly investigate any reports of wrongdoing at the VA, regardless of any NDAs that employees have been forced to sign?
Thank you, Senator Hassan, and absolutely, yes, I will.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to hear you're committed to conducting thorough, independent reviews of any allegations of wrongdoing, and I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you, Senator Hassan. Senator King.
I want to thank you for the time you took for us to discuss your history. You were eminently qualified for this position up to about January of 2020. And I don't want to just keep going over and over, but well, I guess one thing we learned yesterday that the Office of the Inspector General in the VA is being cut by 100 people. Were you aware of that?
No, Senator, I was not.
Well, check the budget. You're going to lose 100 people before you even walk through the door.
I will definitely look
To
into
me,
that.
that
Senator.
doesn't indicate a great deal of respect and confidence in the job of the Inspector General. And the challenge that you have is having been a close advisor to the Secretary and then turning around and being Inspector General. That's what we've all been concerned about. And I think that's, Senator Blumenthal at the beginning said, basically, you have the burden of proof, given this close relationship to the Secretary as an advisor for the past 4 months, through a pretty tumultuous time, to convince us that you can turn around and have an objective, independent view of actions taken by the Secretary or by senior advisors. Give me a reason to vote for you here. I like you. As I say, I think you were very well qualified, but it's very unusual. The research I've done, it's very unusual for IGs to be appointed from within the agency that they're going to be an IG. The conflict of interest just sort of jumps out at you. And given your longtime association with the VA, you know the people, and your close association with the Secretary, convince me that you can be objective and forthright and tough, which is the job of the Attorney General.
Well, Senator, I appreciate the opportunity, and thank you for the question. As we spoke yesterday, and as you know, I think it's very important to look at my background and my history. Yes, I came in the department as a senior advisor in January of 2025. We are not disputing that. But again, my role as senior advisor, I think there's been some assumptions made. I was brought back at the request of the president. He asked me to return because of my 28 years in the department as an impartial, independent
And
actor.
if you were
as
before
chairman.
this committee as a deputy secretary or another role, I don't think we'd be asking these questions. You're coming into a very unusual job in our government and a very important job. And that's the difference. Do you see? You're not
understand that.
coming in as a policymaker.
I understand that. And Senator, very little about my background and my experience is typical. I'm known for my unusualness. So let me talk about that. I was brought back because of that independence and that background. And when I was asked to advise the Secretary on various things from that independent, impartial review, the Secretary was not looking for yes people. The Secretary was looking for impartiality, independence, of someone that can challenge conventional wisdom, do things differently. That's what I bring to it. So from my time as chairman of the board, previously as a judge, I look at things independently and impartially. Even stepping out of the role as a careerist into a political role during the Trump administration the first time and walking into the role as chairman. That also was fraught with concern because, again, I had to act independently. And I held people in the department at bay when they tried to infringe on actions of the board. And I will do the same as Inspector General. I'm known as a tough, honest broker. I put veterans first. I am about the veterans and the families of this country. That's who I serve, and that's who I've served for since I was 20-some years old.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I appreciate your forthrightness. I'd like to suggest, if you're confirmed, the first investigation should be in these non-disclosure agreements. Number one, they lack the legally required language that's supposed to be in all government non-disclosure agreements, that it does not apply to whistleblowers, to the Inspector General. The one that has been circulated that we've seen in the department does not have that language. It requires that they report to Congress, but that's about it. In other words, it's an illegal non-disclosure agreement. The second question I hope you'll examine is, why do you need a non-disclosure agreement for talking about a restructuring exercise? Non-disclosure agreements, in my experience, usually involve sensitive procurement information and national security. That's neither the case for how to reorganize the Veterans Administration. I hope that that's something that you might look at. I think the non-disclosure agreement that's been signed is illegal and unnecessary, and it certainly doesn't fill us with confidence that this is going to be carried out in an open, transparent, and thoughtful way with the engagement of this committee and interested parties across the country. So that is something I hope you'll take under advisement, as we say in the legal field, but I'm seriously concerned about it. There shouldn't be a non-disclosure agreement on something like how we're going to reorganize the department. And by the way, the department has not been forthcoming at all to this committee about their plans and how this process of firing 80,000 people is going to be carried out.
Thank you. I will take that under advisement, and I do believe that the Whistleblower Act and Accountability Act that was sponsored by Senator Blumenthal should be followed under the law.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mrs. Mason, Senator King used the phrase or two words, close relationship with the Secretary. What is the relationship with the Secretary?
I see the Secretary periodically. I would not call what our relationship a close relationship. In fact, since the beginning of May, I think the day or so after my nomination, I moved out of the Secretary's suite. I rarely see the Secretary. I wouldn't call any relationship I have with him or any other members of the political team a close relationship or a friendly relationship.
And what does your word periodic mean?
It means I might run into him if we happen to be in the building at the same time at breakfast, and he says hi and I say hi.
Mr. Chairman, I wasn't going to bring this up, but since you did, yesterday when you left my office and you were walking with my staff member, you noted a Pepsi machine and a Coke machine. You said, I like Pepsi, but the Secretary's a Coke guy.
He is.
That sounds like a relationship to me.
No, it was a conversation that was very early. I went into a meeting with Diet Pepsi, and he had Coke. And he said, Ms. Mason, I prefer Coke. And I said, I prefer Pepsi. We're going to request for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature. Senator Morano, it's nice to see you again. I appreciate the question. And no, I have not, but I have certainly been the subject of them. Entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct. No, I have not, Senator. Thank you. It is very clear that our IGs have to be very independent. And you noted that it is important that IGs be impartial and independent. You said that in the beginning part of your testimony. And there are serious concerns, and I would say legitimate concerns about whether you will be able to be independent and impartial because you you were a senior advisor to Secretary Collins. Now, you testified today that you had nothing to do with the very controversial firings and the potential firing of another 80,000 plus employees at the VA. But here you are, you sit as a senior advisor and as an attorney. Did you ever raise the concern with the secretary that maybe what he was doing was illegal? Well, Senator, I appreciate that question. And as a senior advisor, what I can tell you about my client is it's impartial. There's privilege, and so anything I advise the secretary stays between me and the secretary. You testify. You opened the door. You testified that you had nothing to do with the firings and the potential firing of 83,000 more people. And I'm just asking that as senior advisor, did you consider it your responsibility to raise the potential that what he was doing was illegal? Senator, just answer yes or no. I'm not asking for any other kind of content. Senator, I didn't know about them until after the fact, so no, I did not. See, that is why you're being asked all these questions, because as senior advisor, one would think that maybe something as big as the kind of controversial firings that Secretary Collins engaged in would come to your attention, and you would say something about it. And so I think that is one of the reasons that the Washington Post, Wednesday, May 28th, they included you in an article in a list of Trump administration nominees who have, to quote the Washington Post, clearly partisan backgrounds. That is not what we need or want in an IG. It's bad enough that President Trump fired a whole group of IGs illegally. But his modus operandi says, why did he do that? Because he doesn't want IGs that are independent. And so you step into a role where these kinds of questions are going to come up. It is very clear that this president likes people that he can count on, that he thinks will be loyal to him, that he thinks will do his bidding. That is his modus operandi. And here you come with telling us that you're going to be impartial and independent, and were it not for the fact that you serve as senior advisor, and even when you were nominated to this position, you did not see fit to resign, give a little space between your role as senior advisor to an agency that you're supposed to be investigating independently. That would help, but you didn't do that. And that is why, I think these questions that we have about your independence, in view of why President Trump fires everybody and gets rid of everybody who can even stand up to him, we have these concerns. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator, thank you now. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Ms. Mason. I think we served in the building at the same time at one point.
Yes, we did, ma'am.
So I know exactly what the inner sanctum of the Secretary's office looks like. And if you're behind those doors, you're in the inner sanctum. You're not just floating out there. So you probably saw him a lot more than you are trying to lead us to believe. I just want to follow up on your answer to Senator Hirono. Are you invoking attorney-client privilege and not responding to her question?
No, I simply, thank you for the question, Senator Duckworth, and it is a pleasure to see you again. No, I'm not. I'm simply saying that there are situations that I may have advised the Secretary on that wouldn't be appropriate for me to talk about. This question she asked me was a question that I could answer, that I was not engaged and involved with, and it was not my place to offer my opinion in that situation.
Did you advise the Secretary on setting the 80,000 goal for firing VA employees?
And no, Senator Duckworth, thank you. I was not involved in that decision.
Congress established offices of Inspector General in 1978 to, quote, create independent objective units within agencies. I'm going to continuing on the question line that my colleagues have already started. But critics have questioned whether a federal agency IG can truly be, quote, independent if these officials can be fired by a president who leads the administration and IG is tasked to oversee. Now, to be fair, Congress has recognized the weakness of allowing a president to silence an IG who might uncover problems that an administration would prefer to sweep under the rug. In fact, 30 years after the passage of the original IG Act, Congress amended the law to enhance transparency and oversight over potential IG firings. Ms. Mason, can you please remind our committee of what Congress did in passing Section 3 of the IG Reform Act of 2008?
Let me see if I remember that one.
Would you like a copy of it? I can give you a copy.
That would be wonderful, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to provide the witness with a copy of the act.
Without objection.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator Duckworth, and I do remember reading this now. Yes, I think it's really important to note that 2008 was where the Congress put in some protections about the 30-day notice and some other areas that asked the president to do so before removing an IG.
Thank you, Ms. Mason. So I raised the core issue of IG independence because the unfortunate reality is this. Your nomination is only possible because President Trump fired without a cause or explanation, let alone the 30-day advance notice is required by law, that the Honorable Michael Missile, who had effectively served as VA IG since 2016. Ms. Mason, did President Trump violate federal law when he indiscriminately fired IG Missile and failed to provide Congress with a written notice at least 30 days in advance of the removal of his and fire the independent and nonpartisan VA Inspector General?
Well, Senator Duckworth, I appreciate that question. And again, that issue is currently before the courts, and I would have to defer to the courts and the judge to make that decision. And after they make that decision, I will be happy to answer the question.
Then I will come back to you.
Okay.
It's a simple question. As we discussed, the law is clear. It requires written notification to Congress, and it mandates that such notice be delivered at least 30 days in advance. Look, a key reason that Congress established the IG law, IGs, was to help ensure any given presidential administration complies with the law. And I am deeply troubled that you are unwilling to simply identify President Trump's textbook violation of the law. And your nomination was literally made possible because President Trump committed that textbook violation of the law when he fired IG Missile, so that he could appoint his own hand-picked appointee, you. IGs must be willing to speak truth to power, so let's try a far simpler yes or no question. Ms. Mason, did President Joe Biden win the 2020 presidential election?
The 2020 presidential election, I believe he did, yes.
Okay, thank you. And if given an illegal and unconstitutional order by either the Secretary of Veterans Affairs or President Trump, what would your actions be?
I will always follow the law, Senator Duckworth, just as I did as chairman, with the same president in office as well as with Mr. Biden, with President Biden in office.
Thank you. And you're back, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Duckworth, thank you. I don't intend to have a second round of questioning, but I want to give the leeway to the ranking member who has a question to follow up, and then I'll ask you, Ms. Mason, if you have anything you want to conclude, anything you would like to try to correct, or I'm not suggesting you need to correct anything you wish to have said before we ask Mr. Bergen to the table.
Thank you,
Senator
Chairman.
Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put into the record two articles, one from Government Executive entitled VA Forces Staff and Workforce Reduction Discussions to Sign Non-Disclosure Agreements. Another from the New York Times, Fired Inspectors General Raise Alarms as Trump Administration Moves to Finalize Purge, and then a letter that I did to the Council of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency. Let me ask you—
Without objection.
Thank you. Let me ask you, have you been involved in the termination or firing of any employee of the Veterans Administration?
Since taking office in 2025, I have not. Prior to that, as chairman, yes.
In other words, since taking your present position, you have not been involved in any termination or firing of any single or any employee whatsoever?
No, Senator Blumenthal, I have not.
How about in the cancellation of any contract?
I have not been involved in any cancellations of any contracts, Senator Blumenthal.
Prior to this role, you served on the President's transition team?
I did, yes.
And what was the subject matter?
The subject matter was the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Department of Veterans Affairs.
Yes.
So your involvement in the Department of Veterans Affairs predated your present position.
My involvement with the Department of Veterans Affairs goes all the way back to 1990, Senator
Well, I
Blumenthal.
mean, as part of the Trump administration,
Well, as
when
part of,
did you begin your service on the transition team?
I believe it was the end of November of 2024. I would have to check that.
November of 2024. So for whatever number of months it is, you've been involved in reviewing and advising and proposing policies. You've been involved in the workings of the Veterans Affairs Administration.
Senator Blumenthal, thank you for the question. Let me clarify. As a member of the transition team, my role was to speak with the careerists who were currently in, Secretary McDonough, who were leaving office, and find out what they were doing. So I was part of what they would call the landing team. So my role was simply to look at and ask questions about how they were operating at the time to get that information so we would be ready to start out day one.
Could you give me 3 decisions or actions by the Department of Veterans Affairs since the inaugural that you've been involved in doing?
Well, Senator Blumenthal, as a senior advisor, I'm not involved in any decisions. That's not
No,
my
I'm
role.
asking you whether you've been involved in them as an advisor. Three decisions or actions where you've served as an advisor.
I cannot. My role was to gather information and convey that information back
I
and
can't
forth.
believe that you are telling us that you haven't been involved in a single action or decision as an advisor.
I don't have the authority to, sir. My only role is to recommend, gather information, convey information, and recommend to different parties.
I consider your answers just, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal.
Ms. Mason, anything you'd like to add to the record before we call up Mr. Bergen?
Yes, Chairman Moran, a couple of things. So Senator Hirono brought up the concern about me not stepping out of my role. I did step out of my role as senior advisor to the Secretary shortly after it was announced, and I also moved out of the suite, the Secretary's suite, as Senator Duckworth noted, that is behind. And I thought it was very important that I do so. Again, you can't just look at me as my role since January of 2025. And yes, again, I understand Senator Blumenthal's concern about the perception and assumption of senior advisor. But my role as senior advisor, my role, just me, Cheryl Mason, was to come in and bring the knowledge that I have from my many years of service as an independent, impartial player at the Board of Veterans Appeals, 28 years in that role, and making decisions for veterans, serving veterans, and to look at what the department was doing, particularly within VBA, the Board of Veterans Appeals primarily, and to ensure that we were doing our best to serve veterans on education, all lines of business in VBA. I understand that it might be incredulous that I wasn't involved in decisions, but that wasn't my role. My role was to advise and to recommend. Whether the Secretary or other leaders followed my advice, much like as I did as a consultant, sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. So I appreciate it. Thank you. And I'm happy to meet with anybody after the hearing, and I look forward to your post-hearing questions. Thank you.
Ms. Mason, Mrs. Mason, thank you very much, and thanks. We welcome your family to here with you today as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Bergen, would you please join us at the table? Maybe before you sit down, Mr. Bergen, I'll have you stand up. Mr. Bergen, before being recognized for your opening statement, please stand and raise your right hand. And repeat after me if you will. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give before the U.S. Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Thank you. Mr. Bergen, you are now recognized for your statement. Welcome to the committee, and if you have family and others you want to introduce, please do so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Moran, Ranking Member Blumenthal, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I'm deeply honored by the confidence President Trump and Secretary Collins have placed in me to be considered for the position of Assistant Secretary for Congressional and Legislative Affairs at the Department of Veteran Affairs. Although he had to step away to meet with the President, I would like to thank Senator Cornyn for his kind introductions for inclusion in the record. It was an honor to serve alongside a living model of leadership in public service. Senator Cornyn and Sandy are truly the best of Texas. Finally, I want to express my deepest gratitude to my wife, Grace, whose unwavering support has made it possible for me to serve in this role. I also want to thank my mother, Nancy, who served a quarter century as a military spouse, raising 3 children with strength and resilience, instilling in me the values that guide my public service today. The veteran community is my community. I view veterans the same way many of you view constituents in your respective states. I was born into the Army, just up the street from here at Walter Reed Hospital. The son of a West Point graduate, I was raised among veterans from the Vietnam War. From an early age, I witnessed firsthand the stigmas and challenges faced in the community and in seeking care from the VA. Struggling with limited access to mental health support, archaic prosthetic services, and a system that often failed to meet their needs. Their resilience shaped my understanding of duty, sacrifice, and the lasting impacts of war. My family legacy of service runs deep. Both of my grandfathers served in World War II, one in the Army, and the other as a B-17 navigator flying the infamous bombing missions over Germany. My father spent nearly 25 years in the Army, retiring as a colonel. He is buried at West Point. My sister is a VA physician. My wife, Grace, is a federal employee. As a military brat, I experienced the sacrifices service members and their families make, moving every few years, making and losing friends, and constantly adapting. Profoundly impacted by the September 11th attacks, I immediately walked into the Marine Corps recruiting office. I was honored to join the first class following 9/11, a diverse group of Americans from Wall Street to Main Street, united by a shared commitment to our country. As an infantry commander, I deployed with the 1st Marine Division during the invasion of Iraq, where my unit helped tear down the statue of Saddam Hussein. I later served 2 consecutive combat deployments in Fallujah, and I was privileged to stand with my fellow Marines, whose courage and sacrifice will always stay with me. Again, the veteran community is my community. I began my service in Congress nearly 20 years ago in the Marine Corps Office of Legislative Affairs, gaining firsthand experience in how critical congressional engagement is to advance the interest of our service members and veterans. I went on to serve in personal offices, on congressional committees, and ultimately in Senate leadership as the National Security Counsel to Senate Majority Whip Senator Cornyn. Throughout these roles, I witnessed the undeniable truth that when Congress and the VA work together under a common purpose, we can deliver real, lasting results for the veteran community and their families. Just reference the post-9/11 GI Bill, the Mission Act, the PACT Act, and Elizabeth Dole Act to name a few. That collaboration must be honest, bipartisan, and always focused on the needs of those who have served. This experience has prepared me to immediately strengthen that partnership and ensure the voices of veterans remain at the center of every policy and legislative decision. That perspective is deeply personal for me. As a patient of the VA, I've witnessed the agency's transformation firsthand, from the struggles of the Vietnam era to the advancements made for the OIF and OEF generations. That progress in mental health care and prosthetic technology has been remarkable, but there's still more work to do. In recognition of veterans' extraordinary service, Congress has committed vast resources to honor the nation's promise to them. We have a shared duty to ensure those resources are used efficiently, effectively, and directly to improve veterans' care and benefits. When the Secretary asked me to take on this role, I did not hesitate. It offers a rare opportunity to unite my experiences from the kitchen table to the battlefield and to Congress to strengthen this critical partnership and ensure the voices of veterans are at the heart of every legislative conversation. If confirmed, I'll be a tireless advocate for veterans, committed to working hand in hand with Congress in a spirit of cooperation and shared purpose. Together, we can fulfill President Lincoln's promise to care for those who have borne the battle. I will measure every action by a simple standard. Am I delivering meaningful results and real accountability for members of my community who sacrifice so much for this country? Thank you for your consideration. I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Bergen, thank you for your statement. Thank you for your service to our nation. And we welcome your family members who would join you here today. I thank them for their support of your service to the country. Mr. Bergen, for nearly 30 years, I've been a member of either the House or the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs. I cannot recall a time in which I thought that the legislative affairs of the Department of Veterans Affairs was as helpful to me as a House member or as a senator, but more importantly to my constituents. I can't recall the time in which I thought, wow, this is really a good job being done. We had a bit of this conversation in my office, and as I became a leader of the Veterans Committees, I had more opportunity to have conversations and hearings with those who were assigned the task of improving service to members of Congress, service to the committees, but most importantly, our efforts to make sure that veterans who need our help are getting our help. So if confirmed, what actions would you take early on? What's the first steps you would take in your tenure to improve the quality and timeliness of VA's communication with Congress, instill greater accountability within the Office of Congressional and Legislative Affairs, and set the stage for better working relationship between the VA and this committee? How would you measure that success?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd like to start with one of the central tenets I learned in the Marine Corps was the qualities of leadership aren't taking on roles and missions because they're easy. You take them on because they're worthwhile. That's why I'm here. As was pointed out, and I'm sure will not come up in future questions, I have been working as a senior advisor to the Secretary since April. And in that role, and the reason why the Secretary brought me on is because he realized a lot of the issues that have been raised here, a lot of the challenges, a lot of the feedback, and he even experienced that as a congressman over in the House. And I will say to that end as well, as a staffer who's worked, I'm looking at the back row over there, but I've spent some time over there. And Senator Blumenthal, I'd like to compliment you for hiring a fellow Tar Heel. I've spent time back there, and I know the frustrations of the challenges of actually getting responses back from nearly every agency in government. I can't commit to you that it will be perfect, but I can sincerely commit to you that I will use experience that I have both in leadership and in working in Congress to get that done. And to that effect, in my current role, I've spent time making recommendations on the way the office should be organized as far as actually personnel roles, and then also on processes. I had the good fortune of working in the Marine Corps Office of Legislative Affairs, and I sincerely appreciate the leadership of the Marines that I served with over there. I think they built a good model, and I'm trying to take away from that model the experiences that I have that I thought were valuable, and then add on top of that the other experiences that I've had while working in Congress. So to that end, first of all, what was most striking to me when I started was the dearth of what we call congressional relation officers here, both in the Senate and in the House. We're pretty short-staffed on that end, and I find it very challenging to be able to accomplish this role without having those assets out there, the people that are knowledgeable, both of your offices and your issues, being able to provide that candid feedback to the Office of OCLA and to the Secretary. So I've made recommendations that we staff up in those positions. And I've also made recommendations internal to processes as far as trying to respond to the committee in a timely and useful manner, like providing you relevant information that's actually substantive to your requests. Because my experience has been when you don't answer questions, you tend to get more questions. You also tend to get more hearings, and I don't know that that's what anyone wants here on the committee, and I certainly respect your time. So if confirmed, sir, I will continue to work on that and implement some of the recommendations that I've already made.
Mr. Bergen, thank you for your answer, and I appreciate that it's a difficult task getting timely answers from any department or any agency, almost without exception, and I don't know what the exception is. But I want to give somebody the benefit of the doubt in case there is one. But I do want to highlight that this is not an ego kind of thing, because when the Department of Veterans Affairs fails to respond to us, this committee, the members of this committee, the members of the Senate, it further jeopardizes the life and well-being of veterans across the country. And I've said this so many times, mostly what I know about what veterans are encountering is because they'll stop me on the street, they'll send me an email, they'll tell me the story, and that begins the process by which we try to solve problems, sometimes individually, and sometimes those individual problems then lend itself to us figuring out how do we solve problems for more than just a veteran, but veterans across the country. And so your job, if confirmed, is hugely important. I mean, you indicate, and I believe you, that you're doing this for by motivation of wanting to care for your fellow veterans. This is a task that needs the attention, not because you want to make members of this committee happy, but because if you provide the information, perhaps we, along with many others, can serve those veterans and make their life longer, healthier, and the benefits they need to care for themselves, their education, their family. It's different than just the usual complaint that I suppose members of Congress might have about an agency that doesn't respond and doesn't function well. The functioning of what you do can be a life or death circumstance for those we all serve and all care about. Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will say I agree with everything that you have articulated so well just now, and I think it summarizes a lot of the role of our committee and all of us as members of the United States Senate. Let me just come right to the point. First of all, thank you for your service. Thank you to your family for their service. And thank you for your willingness to serve in this position. You've been senior advisor at the VA since April, correct?
Correct.
And during that time, the VA has engaged in systematic denial of facts, stonewalling of this committee in an unprecedented way. And it's been, frankly, bipartisan. Both sides. Inquiries, in effect, either ignored or blown off. The few answers we get are mostly boilerplate, non-responsive repetitions of talking points that fail to address basic questions. It's been true of Secretary Collins' testimony, but also the responses that we've received for example, about the VA's Doge team, what they do, who they are, what they're working on. We've asked by email, and we've asked in hearings. Senator King has sent a letter, and then more than a dozen colleagues joined me in sending a subsequent letter requesting information briefing. We've asked about contracts, and the response has been either to give us inaccurate information, which was acknowledged to be inaccurate, or telling us that you, quote, will not be providing a briefing on this issue. How do you explain this abject failure on the part of the VA?
Senator, first, I want to make sure I clarify that I personally did not say that I would not provide a briefing. I want to make sure that that's not the case. And I cannot speak to all the decisions that have been made, sir. But what I can tell you is I also recognize the challenges that the Secretary has taken on in his role. And I think as everyone in this room can attest, the Department of Veterans Affairs is not a flawless organization, but it is a very large organization.
Well, let me just ask the question again, and I apologize if I implied that you told us that you would not be providing the briefing. The department told us you have been an advisor in the office that was supposed to be responding. Have you been involved in any of the answers to any individuals on this committee or the committee itself?
No, sir.
You've had no involvement.
I have not.
What have you been doing?
I've been working on organizing the Office of Congressional Legislative Affairs in a way that if I'm confirmed, sir, it will be ready to be more responsive. And I would say, I think if you go back and you look at least at the timeliness of responses, that we have been working to some degree to be able to provide those. I've not been involved in the substance.
Part of the answer that you've just given me, and I apologize for interrupting because my time is going to expire shortly. You just said you've been working in restructuring the office so it would be, quote, more responsive.
Correct, sir.
End quote. I'm going to view that in the most positive light and say my conclusion is that you would join me in feeling that the office has been unresponsive so far. But you don't have to agree with me or not. The record shows it has been abjectly unresponsive, and to the extent you've been involved as an advisor and you've known of our dissatisfaction and you're going to be taking over, I am troubled that you haven't said to the Secretary, Secretary Collins, we got to do something here because we're not answering these valid requests for information. Did you ever go to him and say that?
Senator, I'm very sensitive to the concerns that you've expressed and appreciate them very much. I have had conversations with the Secretary about our ability to respond promptly and substantively. That is his intent, is to be able to get there. The challenges are that the size of the organization takes some time to be able to get there, and I think everyone would agree that the policy positions of the previous administration and the current administration are fairly vast. So turning around on a dime for those policies is a challenge that we are working on addressing. So getting the voice and the vernacular correct in the way we respond is something that's a work in progress.
My time has expired. Thank you.
Sir King.
First, I should say that your having been an advisor before now, I consider a qualification as opposed to the last witness. The fact that you've been involved in the inner workings, you know what the problems are. Your record is really impressive, and I want to acknowledge that. Going back to your enlistment, and anyone that was at Fallujah deserves our respect and thanks. I intend to.
Would you pull the microphone?
I'm sorry.
I can't believe I want to hear more of you.
That's a first. I hope that gets into the record. I'm going to support your nomination because you strike me as a straightforward guy who's going to do his best, and I think you have your work cut out for you. The department thus far has not been forthcoming, has not been responsive. And Senator Blumenthal sort of went down the list. And I hope that the way you're going to approach this is, hey, this is our board of directors up there. We better listen to them and we better give them the facts. And is that your approach, that you view your job as conveying to us the factual information about the conduct of the department and the positions of the department and the intentions of the department? Is that a fair description of your job description?
It's a fair description, and it's unfortunate that the chairman just stepped out. But to the same point, Senator, I am very conscious of the fact that I will not make everyone in this room happy, but the necessary part of this role in particular is that we have the discussions, we convey the information, and if where we disagree, we have that disagreement and it's an open discussion.
Well, I have no problem with being unhappy with the content. What makes me unhappy is when my questions aren't answered and I don't get the information. We can differ over the policies, but the important thing is that we have the information. A perfect example is this reorganization. I don't understand why this has to be treated as a national security matter with non-disclosure agreements and not informing the committee. A major reorganization that involves the firing of 80,000 people is of concern to this committee. And I think we ought to have an open dialogue with the department about how it's being approached. What's the plan? Who's going to be making the decisions? What's the timeline? To me, it undermines our confidence when we don't get the information. Another example is the contracts. We started looking for those contracts when the Secretary announced 585 contracts canceled. I think it was on March 4th. We've been asking and asking and asking, and the fact that we haven't gotten a straight answer to that question means we're suspicious. What are we not being told? What's in those contracts that the Secretary doesn't want us to know about? And so you can go a long way, and I hope you'll really be strong and say, look, this is in the interest of you, Mr. Secretary, and the department to rebuild the confidence of the committee. This is a generally bipartisan committee, all committed to veterans. And I think you're in an excellent position. You have a great record to be a really valuable interface between us and the department, but you have your work cut out for you.
Well, Senator, thank you. First of all, thank you for your personal comments. I appreciate those. I can tell you, for your questions in particular on contracts, Senator, that the Secretary did come back to me and he expressed frustration about the fact that we haven't provided you that information, and he wanted to be able to have that open discussion because at the heart of it, and I do believe this, Senator, and I wouldn't be here if I didn't, the Secretary does want to get resources directly to veterans. And the effort that he is leading, which is a humongous challenge, I think everyone here would acknowledge, is a large undertaking with many challenges. And part of those challenges, particularly when it comes to personnel and when it comes to contracts, there's very extensive deliberations involved in that make it very challenging when you're in the middle of those deliberations, to include court involvement as well, sir. So the challenge has been getting organized in a way where we can provide you that information, it not be deliberative, and it actually represent the policies of both the Secretary and the administration.
Well, there's a tension between preliminary and pre-decisional and final, and you don't get any input. And there's some space in between there where we should be engaged. And it doesn't have to be the earliest part of the discussion, but it may be before the final decisions are made and we're presented with a fait accompli. My problem is that there's a wise old man once said, what you do speaks so loudly I can't hear what you say. And the Secretary comes before this committee and repeats over and over how he's all for veterans, but what's being done, both in terms of the proposed firing of 80,000 people and the lack of transparency to us about that program and about the contracts speaks louder than those that language about we're all in this for the veterans. We all are in, but for the veterans. But I'm interested in what you're going to do, not what you're going to say. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Bergen. I will start with the fitness to serve initial questions that I asked of Ms. Mason. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No.
So, Mr. Bergen, having served in several congressional offices, being a veteran, if your office is anything like mine, a lot of the constituent services requests come from veterans. Did you find that to be the case in your service for your congressional bosses?
Absolutely. I mean, it's my observation that it's actually the primary outlet, and one of the reasons why this relationship is so valuable is that you represent the veterans in your state, so are a tremendous resource for us to work together.
So I would think that you would consider our ability to respond to veterans who call our offices for help, that would be a priority for you to make sure that the VA responds and provides the kind of information that the veteran is looking for. And a lot of times it's things like, the ratings and all of that. And I think you understand the need to get back to them with these kinds of answers.
Absolutely, and just anecdotally, when I was first nominated for this position, I think I officially became a congressional office because I received at least 20 calls from veterans asking me about things that were going on and their requests as well.
So I hope that you can make a commitment to us that it will be a high priority for you to respond to congressional officers' inquiries on behalf of veterans.
Absolutely.
And the reality is, though, that things are pretty chaotic within the VA. That the word chaos comes to mind. You have firings, you have canceling of contracts, et cetera, et cetera. And in order to respond to our inquiries on behalf of veterans, you need people to respond to them. And so I would hope that you're going to do whatever you're going to do to get the workers back, because when you start talking about another 80,000 or so more people being fired, that is not reassuring regarding a commitment to making sure that constituent services for veterans will be a high priority. It's a problem, don't you think? It's a challenge.
It's a big challenge. I agree.
And you acknowledge that the VA is a huge agency, and in fact, it is the largest healthcare system in the entire country. You have to deal with homelessness, suicides, all the things that your prior secretary has put at the top of the list. But from where I sit, and in fact, I have been told by my staff as they try to help veterans with their questions that they don't even get an acknowledgement that the VA has received their inquiry. I hope that is something that you will fix, because if we don't even know whether the VA has gotten our inquiry, it's like we're just sitting there going, what the hell? So will you at least implement, yes, we got your inquiry, we're working on it. That would help.
I think that's a fair standard operating procedure. And to that point, and just real quickly, we have 2 to 3 staff that do constituents across all of Congress. That's not enough. And we're working on filling those positions so that we can be more responsive.
And already we are seeing delays, and not only do we not get an acknowledgement that VA got our inquiry, but there is a delay now in getting answers. And really with the veterans, I don't need to lecture you on the importance of making sure that the veterans who served our country, that they get responses. It's very frustrating. We hear from so many of them who've said, I've been waiting months. You sound like the kind of person who will give a rip about those kinds of instances. You would want to fix it.
I will.
Okay. Well, a positive kind of an attitude. I like that. Yeah, and frankly, should you get confirmed, I look forward to the kind of changes that will be happening so that we can get responses, we can help our veterans, they can get answers, they can get delayed payments, et cetera, because you've been there.
Maybe
I
he
look
can-
for,
maybe he can
if
get-
confirmed.
Maybe he can get some of those 100 people cut from the OIG's office.
Maybe when you add to your staff, you can hire back some of the veterans who've been fired.
We have several veterans on our staff, and while we're here, sir, I'd like to recognize, although we've been saying that we are understaffed and there have been challenges in the office, what I have found since I've been there since April is the team that is there is almost entirely veteran, is extremely diverse, and highly qualified, and have been working their tails off, many over and through the weekend, to get this done. And I know that that doesn't look satisfactory on your end, but I want to make sure that I want to recognize the hard work that people are doing in this environment.
And I want to be clear.
Senator Blumenthal.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you. I want to be clear that nothing I have said now or at any time in the past is to impugn in any way the work ethic of the VA workforce. And I am pleased to hear that you think that your office should be more responsive. The responsibility for the evasive and inadequate responses, I put squarely on Secretary Collins.
Senator, to that point, I just point that Secretary Collins is also frustrated, and he's depending on people like myself, if confirmed, and the other leaders in the organization who rightfully, this committee is putting pressure on to fill those leadership roles and to get the job done, as the senator from Hawaii pointed out, to serve those veterans.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Berg and I have just a follow-up, and then we'll conclude the hearing. While I've highlighted the importance of communications and timeliness and response, I also want to ask for your help, if confirmed, in one other arena, although there will be dozens more than the two I've mentioned today. We also need to make certain that the Department of Veterans Affairs follows the letter of the law, follows congressional intent. And I hope that you, as your position, if confirmed, would be the voice for making certain that the intentions of this committee and the legislation that is passed by Congress is something that the Department of Veterans Affairs implements, interprets, and proceeds in the manner in which the law says, and in the absence of a clear understanding of what those words mean, that you convey to those who are implementing legislation passed the intent of Congress. Does your role include that, and are you willing to do so?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. And I have to say, I do not think that I will be put in that position. But as we started off this panel, I've raised my right hand for an oath to the Constitution many times in my career, and I intend to die holding true to that commitment. So I will follow the law.
Thank you, and I guess the additional part of that response is that you will encourage and that the Department of Veterans Affairs also does so.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Anyone? Okay. Mr. Bergen, there appears to be no other questions, and I thank you for your testimony and your time spent with us. Again, I thank you for your service, your family's commitment to your service, your family's service. If any member of this committee would like to send questions for the record to either one of the nominees, they should do so as soon as possible and no later than the close of business tomorrow. And we would appreciate, here's the standard line in my closing of a hearing, and we appreciate the timely response to any such questions the nominee may receive. With that, the hearing is adjourned.